Today, I'm going to do something different. I have a feeling I keep saying it every time, so it becomes a little bit inflated words. Let's do something different today. One thing you can count on, it's going to be something different. All right. The constant. The title of my sermon today is provocative. The title of my sermon is Dr. Jack and Mr. Hyles. Dr. Jack and Mr. Hyles. Now you probably you know the name Jack Hyles, and you probably know the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyles, Mr. Hyde. So obviously there is a bit of a insinuation. Do I say it right? Yeah. Here, and I will explain. I want us to really consider something very important here, and let's go to John chapter. If I can read my own notes, I think it's 15 verse 2. John 15 verse 2. Verse 1. I'm the true vine. This is the Lord speaking, the Lord Jesus Christ, on the last night before he was arrested and then crucified the next morning. That last night, the last thing that one of the last things that he was talking about is he says, I am the true vine and my Father is the husbandman. Every branch in me that beareth not fruit, he taketh away. And every branch that beareth fruit, he purgeth it, that it may bring forth more fruit. Now you are clean through the word which I have spoken unto you. Abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit of itself, except it abide in the vine, no more can ye, except ye abide in me. I am the vine, ye are the branches. He that abideth in me, and I in him, the same bringeth forth much fruit. For without me you can do nothing. And it's such a profound thought and profound principle, is that Jesus is the vine and we are in some ways his branches. And as long as you are in that tree, if you are connected to the tree, the life flows through you and you will bear much fruit. Period. Now speaking of the fruit, the Bible says that every branch in me that beareth not fruit, he taketh away. All right. So because there's no life, and we know that we have trees around here, and we have trees, especially poplars in the back, you can see that they no longer, well, they don't bear fruit, obviously, but they don't have leaves, and you can tell, especially in the spring, which ones are dead, and you can just cut them off. All right. Now, what does that mean in our life? Well, some people think that is talking to specific people. So a person, if he doesn't bear fruit, he's cut off. But I'm thinking, I don't know, I'm not going to split hair over this. I think it's true even in our own life that within you, if there are certain areas in your life that doesn't bear fruit, then it's cut off. And things that do bear fruit, what about that? Well, the Bible says that every branch that beareth fruit or that does bear fruit, all right, so what about that one? He purgeth it, right? So it sounds like there is cutting no matter what, It's either cutting off or it's purging, which anybody that knows a little bit about orchards and trees involves some cutting, right? And we know that my dad did a lot of trees, apricots and peaches and apples. I remember, especially in a tree, you want to kind of prune it in such a way that it's the side branches that prosper and the branches that shoot up, they tend to be actually not very good. And if you don't prune tree, it will bear much fruit, but it's going to be small fruit and it's going to be not as good. It's almost like they don't have time really to properly ripe. Where if you really kind of control the tree and cut the unnecessary branches, you prune it, That way, the normal branches can get the majority of that supply, that nutrition, and bear actually maybe less fruit, but more pleasant to the better fruit. All right, and in some ways that means that what is it about us? We have a tendency maybe to be scattered and all over the place, and God almost has to focus us. Let's just focus on this and focus on that. And sometimes that's a painful process because sometimes it's a painful process because we don't like to lose something, right? We don't like to go through the process of purging, but it is actually a process of a loving father, of a loving husbandman or loving farmer here who really does a painful thing, but does it for our benefit, okay? Now, going back to Dr. Jack and Mr. Hyles, I'm going to talk today about a phenomenon that really is not unique to Jack Hyles or any other person. And that's the phenomenon I'm talking about is obviously a phenomenon that you can observe through that story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. What is that? Well, it's one person, but you see two different persons. Right? But it's actually one person. And it's a strange discovery through that story. Oh my goodness, this was actually the same person. But actually, people were convinced they're talking about two different persons. But it was actually the same person. And we're going to think about really the corrupting power of ourselves, the corrupting power that's in us that can lead us a certain way that is maybe contrary to the best thing we would like to have, right? And I'm talking about corrupting power that we can see demonstrated, manifested in the Bible on certain people. For example, think about the king Saul, the first king that Israel had. Remember they were looking for the king, and Samuel was not very happy that this is what they were looking for. But they got a king, and they got Saul. We know about Saul that Saul was very humble. At the end of Saul's life, we see a corrupted life. If you compare 40 years later, when Saul is dying in the field, and just the night before he was basically asking for divination through a witch. And we look at Saul 40 years prior when he is humble and and he's just chosen for the position of the king. We see sad difference, sad decline of a person. And let that serve us as to me, that's almost scary. That's warning, right? How about Absalom? Absalom, mighty man, handsome guy, full of power, full of promise. I think that when David was thinking about his kids, I bet you this is what parents do, right? Who would be the right guy to replace me one day, right? I personally think that he was probably thinking about Absalom, because Absalom was just really natural man. It was just this presidential type, mighty and strong and handsome, that would be the guy. But then we see Absalom ended up through different steps corrupting himself all the way to the point that he turns against his own father. He wants to kill him, destroy him. He steals his property, his kingdom, his concubine, wives, and he ends up very bad. I mean, it's so scary, isn't it? But don't you think that, well, I'm not like that. This is not, no, we are able to fall like that, right? Now, what about David? Well, David, we see David as a positive man, but there was a chapter in David's life where David was going down, right? David used to go to the battles and he would be fighting the enemies of God's people. But here we see in his life where he is not going to the battles. The Bible tells us that in the evening he gets out of the bed. That tells us something. Then he is kind of walking on the wall of his palace. He's kind of peeking, and poking around. And there he sees a woman. And maybe he wanted to see some woman, And there he sees as this woman, half naked, bathing herself. And his mind continues to play games with him. It's just for chat. We'll just chat, and then night goes long and a few drinks and hush hush, and whoops, there's a baby coming. Okay, let's just figure out how to kind of hide it, that doesn't work. It's just you can see, you can see the corruption and decline, but on the surface you wouldn't say that. This is a man, but under the surface, here's a man that is all the way committing actually murder, adultery, murder, and everything else. Until God sends a friend, a prophet, Nathan, and Nathan is able to offer a mirror to the face of David. And he says, "You are the man. You have fallen, David." And he says, "I have sinned." And he realizes it's a bit of a happy ending on that one, because David is well aware. But even David himself is horrified. My goodness, what has happened to me? I have been somewhere, and now look at me where I am. I am corrupt. I have committed adultery. I have killed my friend. What kind of monster have I become? Man, that's a nasty realization, right? Nasty realization. How about Cain, right? Cain, these things don't happen on a dime. There's a corruption. The Bible says that nobody is tempted by God, but we are all tempted by our own lust. And lust conceives and delivers, brings forth a child, and the child is the sin, and then the sin produces further sin and leads all the way to death. All right? That's the nasty reality of our lives. I'm thinking of Solomon. Decline of Solomon. Started certain way, started well as a young man, and at the end of his kingdom, he's got 7,000 wives. He's got 700 wives and 300 concubines. And tons of other things. All right, great corruption. Now, what is it that led to decline of these people? What is it? Let's just go back to, let's say, Saul. What would you say was the number one thing that led to his decline? Jealousy. All right. Envy. Okay. Fear, probably. Yeah. Fear. Yeah. Pride. How about Absalom? What do you think in his case was the one thing that led to these things? Absalom. Anger. A lust after revenge. All right. Yeah. Yeah. Pride, of course. Yeah. I can do better. How about David? What do you think it was in David's case? The story with Bathsheba and all that. What was that? Well, lust. What else?
Adultery.
Yeah. What else, though? Not just lust.
Nothing productive, nothing out there, battle.
Yeah, laziness.
Covering things.
Okay, becoming a little bit more convenient and kind of giving himself to kind of comfortable life and lust and just easy going, right? Okay, what else? Anybody? Lying, but why lying?
To cover everything up.
All right. So what's that driven by? Why would you cover something?
Because you know you're doing wrong.
Okay.
Fear.
So yeah, fear, right? So you're trying to, because you're afraid of the exposure, right? Yeah. What about Cain? Cain when he killed Abel. Envy, yes. What about Solomon? In case of Solomon, what was his in case? What would you say? Lust, okay. What else? Pride, okay.
Covetousness.
Covetousness, but he had everything he wanted. Yeah? Huh?
His
Huh?
His wives turned his heart from God.
Okay, so that's still lust, right? I would say in general, just a huge prosperity and money and glory and everything, right? You know,
Idolatry.
but those were the fruits of that. But what led that person to that state of mind, right? So we see a common themes here, right? What we see behind a decline, which leads to duality, all right? Because we already talk about, let's say, David, right? There is a duality. There's something on the surface, but behind the scenes, there is a decline.
Yeah.
We see that with Saul, right? There's certain things behind the surface, but on the surface, we see, let's say, glorious man. So what is leading to this duality, this hypocrisy? What is doing that? Well, lust, money, fear is a big one. Yeah. These kind of things are common, and our corruption, which is in some ways already there, is amplified by these things. You know, lust, envy, lust after revenge, lust after power. You know, God even asks Solomon, ask me whatever you want and I'll give it to you. And he rewards him with much blessing because he asks for wisdom instead of death of his enemies, money. And I forget what was the other one. Glory, maybe. Huh?
Long life.
Long life, yeah, thank you. But this is what drives us, right? I want this. I want money, and I want death of my enemies. That's big for some of us, and maybe all of us. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where somebody was really pain in the butt, and you almost start to think, I wish that person was not there, and started to maybe dreaming what would happen if the person was gone? Have it happened to you? And I caught myself several times. That thought comes up. And I am scared of that thought. And I am saying, oh my goodness, what's going on here? You stop thinking like that. But that thought can creep in our minds. Yeah? And that's a corruption. That's a beginning of corruption, and it's a step to a next corruption, and so on and so on. Scary thing. It's not a new thing, though. If you go to Romans chapter 7, Apostle Paul is talking about this. He is explaining that verse 14, for we know that the law is spiritual, but I am carnal, sold under sin. For that which I do, I allow not. For what I would, that do I not. But what I hate, that do I. If then I do that which I would not, I consent unto the law that is good. Now then it is no more I that do it, but sin that dwelleth in me. For I know that in me, that is in my flesh, dwelleth no good thing. For to will is present with me, but how to perform that which is good I find not. The Bible explains to us that there is duality in our life. And with our mind as Christians, we love God and we agree with the law, we agree with the good things. And this is not even unique just to Christians. This is even typical to every person. People like to do good, but there's just this tendency in our lives that just drags us down and leads to corruption. And then he obviously ends with that, "O wretched man that I am, who shall deliver me from this body of this death?" And I think it's important to realize this, that our nature, when it comes to our body, our minds, when it comes to these things, our nature is evil. It's not some corruption, it's good, and no, it's actually evil. Jesus sometimes would, when dealing with disciples, he almost sighs and he says, "How long do I still have to be with you?" Which is kind of unpleasant to hear, But that's how unpleasant we are, actually, to Jesus, yeah? And, but obviously he is there because he loves us. He came, but it's not that he didn't have a good time somewhere, so he was looking for something, so he enjoys the time with us. You know, if anything Jesus did enjoy, he enjoyed people just coming to him in faith. That's why I think Jesus really enjoyed the time with the children. Because children are just so open. And obviously the time that he had the least enjoyable was with Pharisees, when they were just really nasty. But what's the difference between children and the Pharisees? It's just merely years. Okay? That's all happened. That Pharisee one day was a child that Jesus would enjoy to be around. But now, many years later, a decline happened to a point that now you have a complete hypocrites. And what did Jesus say? Look at Matthew 23. You don't have to do it now. But look, if you go there to Matthew 23, it's a woe unto you hypocrites, hypocrites, you hypocrites, you hypocrites. Hypocrites! Your duality is mind-boggling. It's all over the place. You're just hypocrites. Scary. What happened? A decline happened. O wretched man that I am. Jesus also says, that which of you would give to your child a snake if he asks you for a fish? Which of you would give him a stone if he asks you for a bread? See, you being evil, you still do good things to your children. How much more our Heavenly Father which is in heaven will give you great things if you ask him. That's his point. But in that, he kind of says that idea that we're evil. We are evil. We are. It's inevitable for us to decline. It's just how it's going to go. What is Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde? So Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde is a novel, kind of like a half horror, very famous British literature. I would say, I'm not 100% sure, I'd say positioned somewhere in late 1800s, maybe 1900s, I'm not sure, 100%. But basically, the story goes like this. There is a Dr. Jekyll, and he's some kind of a doctor or some kind of a chemist, and he is looking for, he recognizes in him certain part of him that he suppresses, but once in a while, he allows it to kind of go and have fun. And it's the ugly side of things. And this is actually not that unusual. Some people actually do that to themselves. They, what stays in Vegas, what happens in Vegas, they stay. People sometimes do that, right? They go for a party and they just get drunk. And this is the year, let's just go for it, right? And then they maybe fornicate and get drunk and do some stupid stuff. And then they kind of go back to their life and kind of behave again. It feels like that's what Dr. Jekyll is doing. He basically recognizes certain passions in him, but they're under control. And he calls it Mr. Hyde. And he is trying to figure out a potion, some sort of chemical drug or whatever, that he can take and he can just transform into a different person, including his appearance. And when he figures it out, of course it's a fiction, and he takes this drug and he becomes this different person, Mr. Hyde, and he goes out there and he is mean and he is just following his pleasures and nobody likes Mr. Hyde. It's kind of weirdo on the street. And first big encounter happens with Mr. Hyde because he goes and just stumbles on some girls and actually step on her and really is nasty. Somebody witnesses it. It's like, what the heck are you doing? And they even press him to pay money to that girl, to her parents, for what he has done. So he pays them, but actually Mr. Jekyll pays for him. Well, because it is Mr. Jekyll. It's a Dr. Jekyll. But when he goes back home, and he lives next door to Dr. Jekyll, when he comes home, he takes a different drug and he goes back to Dr. Jekyll. All right? And then he goes and he's this good doctor that's out there for the community. And the funny part about this story is as he lives and as he grows, that passion does not go away. In fact, that passion of Mr. Hyde in him is getting stronger. And it actually starts to happen that sometimes he transforms into Mr. Hyde not even taking the drug. And it starts to scare him. And it's because now he's losing the control over this part of him. Almost this part of him is starting to get control over him. And he actually runs out of the drug that can bring him back. And now he panics. He's hiding in the streets. Nobody knows where Dr. Jekyll is. Well, because he's in Mr. Hyde's. And finally, he figures out somebody helps him to get a drug to finally get to Dr. Jekyll. And he wants to kind of like end with Mr. Hyde. Because what happens in the meantime, Mr. Hyde actually killed somebody, murdered somebody. And so he washes his hands when he finally finds a potion to get himself back. And he is kind of there's a bit of a period, maybe half a year, where he's a little bit more relaxed and comes back to the community, Dr. Jekyll. But then this just comes back. And Mr. Hyde is just basically becoming unreversible. And eventually, of course, Dr. Jekyll is missing. Nobody knows what Dr. Jekyll is. People start to be suspicious that maybe Mr. Hyde has killed Dr. Jekyll, that kind of stuff. And eventually, they somehow figure out they want to get to the bottom of it. They storm to Mr. Hyde's house, or they go to the Dr. Jekyll house because maybe they think that he's dead there or somebody is keeping him captive, only to find Mr. Hyde there. It's like, what are you doing here? And he is barricaded in the laboratory of Dr. Jekyll. So they storm in only to find him taking his own life. And then they go through the will, and then they find out, oh my goodness, Mr. Hyde was actually Dr. Jekyll. It's a story of Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, one person. Now, to me, it's such an interesting story that highlights the epitome of hypocrisy and duality. Because what does the dual person do? You are something on the surface and something else. And I want to tell us, this is really not that unique. We all have that. And we obviously all have that need and tendency, and it's not always bad, obviously to put your best out on the open. But typically, when you are with your close people, they kind of know a little bit more about you, right? And I know, and it's a very humbling experience. Typically, your spouse, your children, they kind of know the both side of you. They know who you are, and this may be very discouraging. I'm thinking, for example, for Absalom and for his children, this was very discouraging to kind of see their father, and they knew how father was, famous, but they kind of knew the father a little bit different way. But this is not unique to David. This is unique. This is the same for the children too. This is typical to all of us. This is who we are. But there is a part of us that will drag you down and it will corrupt you. And I will talk about what to do with that and how to deal with it. Now, why am I talking about Dr. Jack and Mr. Hyles, which obviously Dr. Jack Hyles was this fundamental Baptist preacher in Indiana that became very famous and very instrumental in founding a lot of churches, and he started a college with backing of a businessman named Anderson. And together they built this college, Hyles-Anderson, where a lot of Baptist preachers and all sorts of church planters and whatever went through. And I really didn't know, I'm not really close to that kind of stream, but I heard a lot of respect for that man, all right? So it was kind of something on the side. But recently I looked into it, and something that struck me, I went to see sort of a celebration of his 40 years, either anniversary or marriage or something like that. And it was a little bit weird. What I saw was weird glorification of a man beyond normal. It just was too much, all right? I mean, he would be welcomed to his church like a rock star. On another occasion, he would have a birthday. I think it was 75 years old, 70 years old, I think, birthday. And the church collected money and presented to him in front of everybody as a gift. $70,000 birthday present. Now, this would be 20 years ago. So 70,000 20 years ago, that's like 200,000 today. $250,000. That's just too much. That's just weird. And then people have placards, and the whole church is just exclaiming. And then you have people, all sorts of things that they must have purchased together because they all hold the same thing. So it was prepared. And I'm thinking, that's just too much. And here I see Dr. Jake Hyles, and he doesn't do anything about it. He just obviously takes it. I was thinking, is this right? This is a little bit too much to me. I just feel like that's just too much honor to just a man. And it's not very healthy. So I started a little bit looking deeper into Dr. Jake Hyles. And what I found out is a lot of hypocrisy and a lot of corruption. And some people will defend tooth and nail Dr. Jake Hyles because, he is the father of the fundamental Baptist movement. Well, one can respect a person, but one also has to be honest about the person. All right? Just like with David, you're a king and you love the Lord, that's all good, but we need to also live in kind of have a blank page. We have to kind of be honest about your life. All right? Otherwise, we are in some ways sinking together into corruption that we're not going to be able to recover from. This decline, and now we're talking about a preacher. Now we're talking about somebody that has done so much for, let's say, church and for the people, and people just look up to the man and they say, what a wonderful person, and that cannot do any wrong. And I'm thinking, it's not right. It's not right to put a person in a position, even in your mind, that he's just not built for it. All right. Now I would like us to look at Agur in chapter 30 of Proverbs. We have man that calls himself brutish. Now, brutish means kind of base man, all right? Kind of hillbilly guy. And he says, surely, verse 2, surely I am more brutish than any man and have not the understanding of a man. So he kind of talks himself down already, and he says, I'm just a basic guy. I don't really have the knowledge of the learned, and so on. And so he elaborates and talks about certain things. And then in verse 7, he has a request to the Lord, and he says this, 2 things have I required of thee, of the Lord. Deny me them not before I die. And he says this, remove far from me vanity and lies. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with food convenient for me. And I find it very, very interesting what he's saying. He's saying, listen, he says, remove far from me vanity, which is emptiness and uselessness, all right? And lies, all right? Duality, hypocrisy, implies there's a lot of lies. And sometimes even lies to yourself. You're trying to hide something from others, and really to be effective at, you have to believe it yourself. And so what he's asking the Lord, please don't let me lies to take hold of my life. Let me live in the truth, no matter how bad the truth is. And in some ways, when we think about David has declined to a spider web of lies, not even properly knowing, and becoming a very merciless person. David. And when Nathan comes to him and confronts him, David is confronted with his lies, and he comes back to the light. He comes back to truth. And this is what Agur is saying, Lord, please take far from me vanity, in other words, emptiness and uselessness and so on, vain things and lies. And then he also says, give me neither poverty, that we understand, nobody wants to be poor. He says, give me neither poverty, feed me with food convenient for me, but also says, give me neither riches, right? He says, I don't want to be rich. Why? Well, because we talked about it. Riches and power leads to corruption. And man, it's just too much for the man. Definitely too much for Agur, but it is too much for Solomon. It is too much for any king, actually. And it is also too much for Hyles. Now, how did Solomon handle his power, his money? Did you know that this is not by accident? The Bible tells us about Solomon. This is in, if you want to look it up, you don't have to, but 1 Kings chapter 10, verse 14, we learn about King Solomon, what he had. He had tons of horses. The Bible speaks about it in 1 Kings chapter 4, verse 26. He had tons of 20,000 horses. In chapter 10, verse 14, the Bible tells us that he collected a lot of gold out of all places. And in 1 year, he would collect, oddly enough, 666, I think it was talents of gold. All right? And which is a hint, all right? It's not an accident. Right? Wink, wink. Right? Also in chapter 11, verse 3, it tells us that he had 700 wives and 300 concubines. Yeah. Let's see what the Bible tells us in Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy chapter 17. Moses, by the wisdom of God, foreseen that they will want to have a king, and he gave them commandment about future king in chapter 17, and he tells them this in verse 14. This is Deuteronomy 17, verse 14. It tells us this: when thou art come unto the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee, and shall possess it, and shall dwell therein, and shall say, I will set a king over me, like as all the nations that are about me, thou shalt in any wise set him king over thee, whom the Lord thy God shall choose. One from among thy brethren shalt thou set king over thee. Thou mayest not set a stranger over thee, which is not thy brother. And that's kind of interesting, because I think that the last king that Israel ever had, which was King Herod, was actually not a Jew, I think. I think he was Edomite, put into power by the Roman Empire. But verse 16, but he shall not, this is the commandment for a future king, he shall not multiply horses to himself, nor cause the people to return to Egypt, to the end that he should multiply horses. For as much as the Lord has said unto you, ye shall henceforth return no more that way. Neither shall he multiply wives to himself, that his heart turn not away. Neither shall he greatly multiply to himself silver and gold. And here we have the most mighty king of the Israel history is by easily Solomon. And yet he multiplied horses, he multiplied gold, and he multiplied wives. Exactly in opposition to this commandment. And the Bible tells us, let's more follow probably example of Agur. Right? Let's be content with what we have, and just have the food convenient to us, because you are just not able very well to handle too much. All right? Which is why this commandment was given. All right? You are king. Sure, there is certain entourage that you will need, and you will need certain government and certain perks. That's a little bit understandable, but it's just too much is too much, and it will lead to corruption. And did it ever lead to corruption in the case of Solomon? Yes, it did. Solomon ended up not losing salvation or anything like that, but Solomon ended up losing the kingdom, not in his lifetime, but basically after he died, because of his life, the kingdom was basically destroyed, or split in half. Same thing happened with many people. Same thing happened in Hyles. Hyles, just, I'm not really going, this is not about Hyles. This is about hypocrisy and about us. I'm not here to expose Hyles. That you do yourself. Right? You go look it up, be judged for yourself. I looked it up, and I judge with my own judgment that man became corrupt. All right? You make your own call on that one. But why should it surprise us? Hyles, when he died, his net worth was about $70 million. All right, that ought to tell you something. Hyles probably had some weird relationship with his own secretary. You can talk to Hyles, his own kids. His son, I think his son is still in prison right now. He probably has 2 more years to serve for as a pastor for fooling around with 16-year-old. You know, and there was a lot of lies and a lot of hiding things, right? And anyway, if you're interested into it, I'm saying I would not want to just bring some kind of rumor that's not unsubstantiated. I have confidence that that man was corrupt, right? Now, what do we take from that? Well, first of all, do not put stock in a man, right? But you will see a lot of Baptists would defend Jake Hyles. Because, and you know what they will say? They will say, because how much he has done. This is a strange argument, you know? So what? Doesn't Bible say that all our righteousnesses are as filthy rags? God does not need any one of us here to you know, it's not going to be like that. You know, you're going to get to heaven and God says, well, you've really done bad things, but you got a lot of people saved or something. It doesn't work like that, right? Doesn't work like that. Now, this decline we can see, of course, with Pharisees. We can see it with Herod. We can see it with Jewish clergy. We can see it with Judas Iscariot. We can see it in 2 Timothy chapter 3. Apostle Paul tells us that evil men. I'm not saying necessarily this. I'm not trying to generalize here, but in general, I guess I am doing it. Chapter 3, verse 10. But thou hast fully known my doctrine, manner of life, purpose, faith, long-suffering, charity, patience, persecutions, afflictions, which came unto me at Antioch, at Iconium, at Lystra. What persecutions I endure, but out of them all, the Lord delivered me. Yea, and all that will live godly in Christ Jesus shall suffer persecution. But evil men and seducers shall wax worse and worse, deceiving and being deceived. And we see corruption all around us, which is really, it's just stupid, all right? But we only hate it because it's so extreme. Like when a man says, you know, I'm a woman. Or when a man says that you can change your gender and bear children. That is just idiotic. The person lost his mind. But that's just a manifestation of human nature. We are able to corrupt that bad. Evil man, the Bible says, evil man and seducer shall wax worse and worse. That's the definition of decline and corruption. Now, corruption, what is it today? People sometimes don't go to the church, and you talk to them, why not? And you say, well, because I see a lot of hypocrisy in the church. And I've seen, and I myself have the tendency, well, that sounds a little self-righteous, right? But I will say, let's just be fair. I think a lot of people really are discouraged to go to church because of hypocrisy. Yeah? Because they do see, you know, Joel Osteen, and they see the duality of it. If there's a lot of people that just eat it, like, no problem. But there's a lot of people that will see it, and they say, okay, this is not right. They will see some preacher preaching certain things, while behind the scenes, he lives completely different life. And whoever kind of sees that behind the scenes, it must be really difficult for their heart and conscience to kind of handle these two things. I think Benny Hinn, I think he had a son-in-law or son, and he had to get out and say, there's a lot of duality, a lot of hypocrisy. I heard the same thing about some staffer from Joyce Myers. And people always dismiss it, well, it's just some kind of, person that got triggered or whatever. You know, well, it could be, but most likely this is really going on. Benny Hinn, Kenneth Copeland, and all these clowns. But we don't have to go to such extremes. You know, people have seen decline with people like Billy Graham. People have seen decline with John MacArthur, right? And his riches, you know, like he's got tons of properties. How about Rick Warren? You know, and I just mentioned somebody like Jake Hyles. Jeg Hyles, it feels like it doesn't belong in this group, but just look into it, right? That man, you find all those common traits. Now, what's common among all these people? Same common traits that you'll find. Go wash your face, yeah? Refresh yourself. The same things that you'll find with the people that we discussed before from the Bible. You'll find popularity. You'll find success. Sometimes it can be defined by money, glory, how many enemies you killed. In a case of a Baptist preacher, it can be how many people he got saved or something. And, Jeg Hyles would be bragging, and I think their website, the Hyles-Anderson, they would be bragging that they get baptized 10,000 people every year. And people that really care for winning souls, okay, case closed, right? 10,000 people, what can be wrong with that? That's not right to do it like that. That's not right. To close your eyes just because the result. What if there is lies about the 10,000 number? What if the performance and doing these great things, getting soul winning, in some ways is actually cover for the corrupted life? You think people would do that? Mm-hmm. You know your heart. Have you ever seen a person being guilty? Children are easier to see. Have you seen a person knowing that he has done something wrong and suddenly trying to be really nice? Yeah? Yeah? Do we have that tendency? Suddenly very polite, very humble, helping at home a lot. To a point that the parent may say, well, what have you done? What's wrong here? Because it's not normal. And so just because you see someone's good behavior, well, don't be fooled by that. It could be driven by the desire to somehow cover for the sins. But that's not how you cover for the sins. How do you cover for the sins? You never can cover for your sins unless you're willing to die. The only way to cover for sins is to bring it to the Lord and let Him cover it. But that also means to come and confess. It doesn't always mean that you have to confess publicly about your secret sins. That's not what I mean. But sometimes you have to come clean before the Lord and accept, I am a crooked man, Lord. O wretched man that I am, Lord. What did David say to the Lord? Was it Psalm 51 or 91? I forget, look at the confession of the man. He's a broken man, right? It's a broken guy. I am wicked. I am a monster. Have mercy on me, God. Right? And that's where something can happen. That's the recovery that can happen. Not by covering things with a lot of good things and getting people saved and build something for the Lord. And no. All our righteousnesses are as filthy rags. You cannot pay for your crookedness and corruption by good things. Let's remember that Cain did come to the Lord and sacrifice. Yeah? And the Lord was not interested. Nobody is interested in your wonderful things. You've got to come clean. Confess, be stripped. The Bible says, I am sick of your sacrifices. I'm sick of your meat offerings. I cannot stand it. It's mine anyway. I don't need you to do that for me. And he says the perfect sacrifice is a contrite and broken spirit before God. That's what we have to do. And that's the essence of the gospel. The gospel builds on the idea that you are a crook and you understand it and you come to God and say, I'm a crook. And I'm a lost man, and I need to save me. Give me a light. Don't take away the Spirit from me. I'm not saying that's necessarily a possibility, but that's the heart of David. Right? So, Jeg Hyles, I'm not impressed, but I'm not necessarily, destroying the man. I know myself. You know, if I would somehow disparage Jack Hyles, I would have to disparage everybody, including myself. And maybe I should do that. You know, that's really the right attitude to have towards any man. Now, one of the things that draw me to this whole idea about Jack Hyles and Dr. Jack and Mr. Hyles is another side of all these things, is the impression and reputation of Dr. Jekyll. That's what comes on the surface. And I just do not like it. I don't even have to be thought. It's in some way repulsive to me. When I see people too much licking the boots of somebody else, I just don't like it ever and ever, ever. All right? I have done it myself, and when I look at myself, I'm embarrassed of myself when I did it in the past, right? And it's not different, when you see, let's say, old scenes from, let's say, concert of Beatles. What do you see? You have this fence, and you have these young girls screaming, right? That is embarrassment. That is embarrassment to the girl and to the parents. The same thing you've seen with many other stars, and some of these girls, they almost chase those guys and see who they can go to bed with. It's embarrassment. Why are you so low? Why don't you have some self-respect? What are you doing here? When you look at some old shots from, let's say, pre-World War II era of Germany, and you see masses eating the words of Adolf Hitler, right? And people say, well, Adolf Hitler had this satanic power over the people. I don't think so. I think it was just really, in the context of Germany, which was terribly humiliated and economically brought down to their knees. Now you have a man that gives them some hope and is forceful and is very inspiring and charismatic in his speech. And you listen to it in German language and it kind of sounds weird. That's just because you don't speak German. If you could speak German, it would be almost like taking notebooks from, I don't know, Kennedy or somebody. What did Kennedy say? Do not ask what the state or government can do for you. Ask yourself what you can do for the country, right? That was his line, right? That's almost exactly what Hitler said to people in one of those speeches. But that's the kind of stuff he would say. But what do we see when you look at those movies? It's always easier to see on a caricature this behavior to really realize, am I doing it too, right? Just maybe in a different form and maybe different grades. So what do you see when you see people looking up to Hitler? You see masses in tears. You see extraordinary claims, like, we're the greatest or whatever. You see godlike aura around the leader. People are almost afraid to, he is on a very high pedestal. You see sometimes that kind of admiration from very desperate people that have been brought down very low, and in some ways he brings some answers and some solutions to the people. You can see it a lot from especially young people, and young people have a tendency always to look for ideals. That's why education is targeting young people, because they not only they're moldable a lot easier, but also they get easily inspired. Very difficult to inspire a 60-year-old that has everything, right? A person that has money and health and good wife and kind of normal life, you're not going to easily fool into something. But a person that doesn't have anything, that have been, let's say, abused or somehow ridiculed, or maybe is young and doesn't see any future, and suddenly a leader comes and gives him an inspiration, man, you have a force. And these people will be dedicated. And now you see that. Yeah? And I think that we are coming I think it's possible, that maybe we are coming to some difficult time. I mean, who knows what's going to happen? I personally cannot see how the American system with the dollar and everything will not fall. It must fall. Something is going to happen. You were just saying that you were in the States, and you could see the division, right? Because of these agendas and all that stuff. There's a huge division. And who knows, like if things go bad, this could result in a civil war. Add to it a collapse of a dollar or some kind of a switch to a different currency and people lose properties. What happens if a lot of people lose money through their RSPs or their 401ks in the States? You know, what happens? Well, people become desperate. People would kill themselves if they lose all the money. Some people do that. And what if you have such a people, and then comes a leader, and that's kind of what I saw with Donald Trump. It's a very conflicting thing to see with Donald Trump, because you kind of sympathize with people's frustration with the wickedness and lies in their system, right? And it's the same thing we see it here, just not as extreme. And then Donald Trump's going to see him, and no matter what he has done, what kind of person is he will just put it under the rug, but he is telling the truth, right? And then you have a people dedicated and see that this is our president. And I don't know what to say. I just feel sorry, man. What I see is too much of a glorification of a man. Like he is the man. And I feel that especially people in a difficult times are, and you know, if we bring it to the churches, to Christianity, what do you see? You see decline of the churches. You see pastors, certain churches, they fly gay flags, and other pastors, they are switching to different Bibles, and they're closing churches because COVID, and this man is corrupt, and this guy has to buy a plane, and he takes some money from some poor widow, you idiot, and you just support this nonsense. Then you see this corruption, and then corruption, and suddenly there can come a leader within the Christianity, and he says, we are different. Our girls wear skirts, and boys have short hair, and we do it. Well, sometimes people can be flocked to that and say, this is our man. You know, we had here a guy, for example, and he was referring to someone, I don't need to name a name here, because that's not what it's about. I want you to understand the principle. But remember, he said about somebody else, this is our modern Apostle Paul. Right? You know, what does it talk about? It talks about too much of admiration, an elevation of a person just too high, man. Don't do that to yourself, and don't do it to that man. Right? Don't do it. Now the question is, where do they get such a power? These people, Hitler and Jack Hyles and Copeland, and I'm not putting them together because of similar doctrinal beliefs. Obviously, it's very different people, but the phenomenon is the same, which is too much of admiration and hypocrisy every time, right? Because the same thing was with Hitler, right? It was very carefully protected reputation of Adolf Hitler. Now, how do they do that? How do they do it? Well, sometimes it's just illegitimate. You just do it through trickery. Just through lies. You have these healers, and they heal everybody, and they fake it in the public, right? So you can do it through that. You can do it through stealing it. Or you can do it through witchcraft. I'm thinking, for example, how many people look up to Rasputin in Russia, in Tsarist Russia in 1910s. Now, Rasputin was able to control the royal family. And did you look at the man? It was a demonic person, weird guy. Sometimes it can be through witchcraft, or through lust or lasciviousness. All sorts of things you can accomplish through that. But sometimes it can be legitimate. For example, a person can solve a problem. Like Hitler, in some ways, solved a problem for his people. What did he do? He arrested Rothschild, and he said to all those nations that say you have to pay these reparations, which were unjust and nonsense. Why should Germany? Because there was a hatred in Germany, and there was a fear of Germany that it could actually grow and put the position of Britain in question, right? So let's just put Germany on their knees. Let's put them down. Well, Hitler said, I'm not paying any reparations anymore. And the moment he did that, suddenly Germany boomed. You know, if you look at Germany in 1930s, and I heard these stupid arguments. Well, that because he was investing a lot of money in the weaponry. That's just nonsense. You know, that's a waste of money. That doesn't produce anything. That doesn't create prosperity. Prosperity is created when people actually build something that is useful for somebody else. And weapons are not. Weapons are maybe for the future, so that's a loss. So no. The prosperity of Germany in 1930s was because they were suddenly free from the debt. That's it. It's a very simple formula. And it's a legitimate thing to do. This is what Americans did with their revolution, right? We're just going to cut you off, British, and suddenly America boomed. You know, it's not that complicated. Sometimes it can be through excellence. Maybe somebody may look up to an artist and see an excellent art or excellent preaching or excellent whatever it is, right? Somebody gets people saved a lot or something. I don't know. You know, people may see preaching Jesus everywhere, you know, like Billy Graham. This is the argument that sometimes people bring up about Jack House. He got so many people saved.